Hi, mystery writers. Welcome to the Mystery Writer Studio. And we just cover different points about writing mysteries. Last week we talked about the first part of the middle, and we're using the four act structure just to be clear about where we are. So, in just to recap, last week we talked about the second act, which takes the story up to the middle. And at that point in time, for mystery writers, everything is expanding. Your detective is identifying suspects, they're looking and gathering clues and evidence, and just getting a lot of data in their sleuth's head about what could be the possible reason for this crime. And today I want to talk about the second part of the middle, because the middle is the biggest part of your book, and it's the place where people struggle, and there's even a saying, the muddy middle, where things get lost, so we don't want to do that. So, yeah, in the first part, if you struggle on expanding your story and expanding information, you'll be right on track with your mystery novel. And then in the middle, something happens, and your detective feels at a standstill. They feel that all the information that they've gathered so far is not getting them where they want to go. And oftentimes, they feel super discouraged. And depending on your character and the story, they may even feel like they want to give up. So now in the middle, your sleuth re examines the way that they were looking at the problem during that whole first part of the middle, that whole second act. And they're looking at the murder victim, looking at the suspects, sorting through clues, and the conversations that he or she has had with suspects. Your sleuth may notice overlooked items from the first half of your story, and some clues are going to turn into red herrings and drive your sleuth to take a closer look at uh, what the reality of all the remaining clues. So if your sleuth finds one red herring, it's like, maybe I better look at some of these other things I thought were obvious clues and see if they really are clues that are going to point me toward identifying the antagonist, the person who committed the crime. Now, one of the things that happens as you get past the midpoint is your reader really has a good idea of your sleuth, and you can start showing the sleuth skills and traits in a new light, um, and especially how their strengths and weaknesses actually lead them into trouble, because this part of your story is going to be filled with obstacles, discouragements, wrong paths, and your sleuth has to keep re examining everything. Um, every obstacle, like a suspect's reluctance to talk, challenges your protagonist. This whole second part is filled with challenges for your sleuth. They may need to combine their skills in new ways, and those new ways, which seem like the right way to approach a problem at the time, lead to new frustrations. So you're just piling on the trouble. It's one of the main things that happens in this second part of your middle. You're making your sleuth work hard for any scrap of information, um, and 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 your sleuth is going to have trouble emotional trouble, physical trouble, and psychological trouble. So just pile on those obstacles and lead your sleuth down wrong paths. Um, so now you're showing your reader how your sleuth handles trouble, because here it is and here it is again, and your sleuth has to come up with all these ways to overcome those obstacles. And Act 3 is also where your supporting characters show their true colors. Friends may become enemies, enemies may become friends. I'm sure you've seen these reversals in stories, and those surprise reversals keep readers turning pages. And just when your protagonist needs a helping hand, that a reliable friend has something more important to do, and it could even be something from a subplot. This is where you can weave those your subplot and your plot together. Um, Opponents become more difficult. So, I want to make clarify the difference between opponents and the main antagonist, the villain. Opponents are people, characters in your story that have it in for your sleuth. So it could be, if they're a law enforcement officer, somebody else in their department that just keeps them from dealing with the mystery they want to solve. Um, a love interest may have second thoughts. Uh, a talkative suspect clams up, and your supporting characters add to your investigator's troubles. All this time, the villain may be working behind the scenes to thwart your protagonist because they have this sense that the protagonist, your sleuth, is getting closer to discovering who they are. Um, the protagonist and the reader may not know now, but you want to keep your villain sort of present by including them with the other suspects who don't behave well. Other suspects who don't behave well. So, also in Act Two, you're going to be working on your subplots. Anything subplots that you just uh, yeah, any subplots that you introduced in that first act. Now in Act Three, you can pile on the complications in the subplots as well. And your sleuth's internal dilemmas may drive them away from finding the villain. And now is the time to get into your various subplots and make them complicate that main story, the mystery that your sleuth is trying to solve. And you probably want to start winding down minor subplots in Act 3, because when you get to Act 4 in that final revelation, um, you you want to focus on revealing the villain and that final confrontation between your sleuth and the villain. So drive those subplots toward the sleuth in this third act, and wind things down in your subplots, especially the minor subplots. So I want to go back to the sleuth choice. Um, your sleuth choice is road is now completely different than it was in Act Two. All right, and your sleuth makes a choice of someplace right around the middle that heads them toward the villain, and the villain may even divert the sleuth from that path. Um, and as your sleuth begins eliminating suspects, they may overlook the villain and start down another false trail that seems like the right decision. This is all about making decisions, dealing with the consequences, making a new decision, dealing with the consequences. And that new choice that your sleuth made after the midpoint will not get the results they want. And the undiscovered villain may set a trap that confuses your sleuth even more. And your detective starts feeling like they're in over their head. And now they have to gather forces, find new support, discover new evidence, and somehow get closer to discovering the murderer. Your sleuth takes a new look from a new perspective at all the old evidence and all the old um, suspect statements that happened in Act 2. He's looking for the evidence or suspect statement that he overlooked before. So now on this new discovery path, your sleuth feels that they're closer to the killer. So we've gotten up to kind of the middle of that third act, and so I want and the sleuth is getting closer to the villain. There may be some big obstacle that makes your sleuth rethink everything all over again. All right. But I want to stress the difference between Act 2 and Act 3. What happens before and after the middle. Before the middle, your sleuth is in an expansion mode, in a discovery mode. They're, they're piling on new things, new evidence, new possible suspects. And after the midpoint, things start contracting. They start contracting down. So by the end of the third act, they're pretty close to identifying who the real villain is. They've tracked down all the red herrings. They've re-examined all the clues. They often have second or even third conversations with suspects, which may eliminate suspects. So you're in this third act, you're contracting, whereas in the second act, you were expanding because you're getting closer and closer and closer to the villain. I think if you keep that big overview of what's going on in that third act as all these problems keep compiling, your goal is to start narrowing the field. And each one of these problems actually narrows the field a little more. Your sleuth may not know it at the time, but that's what's happening. And I hope that makes sense. So the second part of the middle compounds your protagonist's problems with reversals and conflicts and surprises that escalate the story's movement. And, but at the same time, your protagonist is moving closer and closer toward discovering who the real culprit is. And with all those changes in directions, you're still heading toward that final act, the fourth act, where everything comes to a resolution and a conclusion. I think this third act is the one that gives most writers, and especially most beginning writers, the biggest trouble because you're escalating the stakes, you're coming up with problem after problem after problem, but at the same time, you're narrowing down that field. So I think if you keep that overview of Act 2 is making an expansion, discovering more and more and more details, and Act 3 is contracting and getting closer and closer to the villain, you'll have your story goal in mind as you present all these problems and conflicts and opposition and all of that. So your middle is where your story unfolds after the beginning, And you want to deliver on your story promise by expanding your story elements and bringing in those supporting characters and enlarging all the story problems, creating opposition, and introducing subplots in Act Two and starting to bring those subplots to a close in Act Three. So let's tackle the middle. So if you think of the middle in two parts, I think it'll help you understand what to do in your story. In Act Two of the middle, you're going to be introducing more and more clues, evidence, and suspects. And in Act Three, you're going to be eliminating clues, evidence, and suspects and getting to the ones that actually lead toward identifying your villain and giving your detective success in Act 4. I hope that helps. Middle is most of your book. So it's a lot of work and a lot of things happen, but I hope that clarifies for you. Um, as mystery writers, we have some special tasks we need to do in the middle, and I think if you think about it, um, you're going to have fun with bringing in the clues and suspects in Act Two, and then narrowing things down in Act Three, even though you're raising the stakes and getting more problems. So just think, expand before the middle and contract after the middle, and I think that'll help you create that big, big, big middle of your story. Okay, I hope that helps. And as always, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And thank you for being here and keep writing.